My name is Sophie, and I am not a woman you can push aside and expect to walk away quietly. For years I poured my heart into family holidays, hanging garlands, baking pies, wrapping gifts with care. Every Christmas, I was the one making their house a home, creating traditions they would one day pass down. It wasn't about credit or recognition. It was about love. But love, it seemed, was not enough. One December evening, just weeks before the holiday, my daughter-in-law sat across from me, her smile tight, her tone crisp. This year we're keeping it small, just immediate family. I blinked, waiting for the punchline. Surely after everything I had given, I was part of their immediate family. But Jenny didn't flinch. I wasn't invited, no discussion, no compromise. Just a swift exile from the celebration I had built with my own hands. I stared at the Christmas tree in my living room, the ornaments I'd collected for decades, suddenly feeling foreign. They had planned a holiday without me, but still expected to inherit my home, my legacy, my years of sacrifice. That was the moment everything changed. And then I started my brilliant career. Call to action, drop your city below. We want to see how far this story has reached. So it started from the moment. The ink dried under my fingers, the weight of the decision settling in my chest. For years I had built this home alongside my late husband, believing that one day it would pass down to my son. That was before Laura decided I wasn't good enough for their family's holiday, before Daniel chose silence over standing by his mother. But now, everything had changed. They would never inherit this house. The moment I placed the will back into the drawer, my phone rang, Daniel's number glowing on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice calm. "Hello, Daniel." There was an awkward pause on the line before he finally spoke. "Mum, Laura's feeling guilty about Christmas. She thinks we should have invited you. She wants to make it up to you." I held back a laugh. Guilty? After shutting me out completely? After reducing me to an inconvenience? "Oh," I said, letting the silence stretch between us. "We were thinking you could visit in the spring, maybe stay a few weeks. Tyler misses you." Tyler, my grandson, the one I had raised when they were too busy climbing the corporate ladder. The child I had rocked to sleep when he had nightmares. They were dangling his name like bait. And then the real reason came slipping out. "We're also meeting with a financial advisor soon. We've been talking about the house. And, well, you're getting older, Mum. We thought maybe now is a good time to start planning the transition." Ah, so that was it. It wasn't about Christmas. It wasn't about guilt. It was about the house, the estate, the beachfront property they had always assumed would be theirs, like I had simply been keeping it warm for them. I let out a breath, slow and measured. "That's kind of you to think about me, Daniel." "Of course, Mum. We just want to be prepared." Prepared. Prepared to move me out. Prepared to take what they thought they deserved. They were about to learn the price of their betrayal. "Funny," I said, finally allowing a smile to creep into my voice. "I've actually been doing some planning myself." Silence, then a cautious, "What do you mean?" I leaned back, glancing at the freshly signed will sitting in the drawer. "I changed the inheritance." The line went deathly silent. For the first time in his entire life, Daniel had nothing to say. Laura must have been nearby because I heard the sharp inhale, followed by a frantic whisper in the background. "Mum, what do you mean, changed?" Daniel said carefully. I let them sit in the fear for a moment before delivering the final blow. "The house is no longer yours, Daniel. It never was. And after how I was treated, it never will be." Laura's voice pierced through the phone, no longer sugary, no longer trying to fake guilt. "You can't do that," she snapped. Daniel is your son. We planned for this." "You have to reconsider." Planned for it. They had already counted the money, already pictured their future on land they never lifted a finger to earn. But the plan was mine to make and mine to destroy. "Oh, I absolutely can do that," I said, my tone sweet but ruthlessly firm. And I did. The pen scratched across the paper as I finalized the documents. This wasn't just legal paperwork, this was war. Daniel had made his choice. He had decided that I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and the home he assumed was his birthright. Laura, with her cold entitlement, had convinced him that I was weak, disposable, easily manipulated. They thought they could steal from me, erase me, replace me. They were wrong. The next morning I walked into my new lawyer's office, the folder clutched in my hands like a weapon. Robert, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, took one glance at the documents and let out a low whistle. "Well, Sophie, it seems like your son has made a terrible mistake." I placed the papers firmly on his desk. "Fix it." He leaned forward, flipping through the revised will, nodding. "Not a problem, but you should prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly." I met his gaze without blinking. It already is. That afternoon I heard the knock. Not a phone call, not an apologetic text. A knock on my door. I knew it was Daniel before I even opened it. He stood there, rage barely concealed under a thin layer of fake concern, Laura just behind him, her lips pressed into a furious smile. "Mum, we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "Do we?" Laura stepped forward, trying to soften her voice, pretending to be reasonable. "This doesn't have to turn into a battle. Let's just sit down and figure out a solution that works for everyone." "A solution that works for everyone? Translation? Give them the house." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "That's funny. Because I don't recall anyone sitting down with me when you decided I wasn't good enough for Christmas." Daniel winced. He knew I wasn't going to make this easy. Laura, however, didn't flinch. "Sophie," she said tightly, "you're being emotional. Emotional. As if they hadn't betrayed me in the coldest way possible. As if losing my son to their greed wasn't supposed to hurt." "You're right," I said, my voice cold as steel. "I am emotional. And those emotions are exactly why this house will never be yours." Daniel snapped. "Mom, I'm your son. You can't just take this away from me." My fingers curled tighter around the edge of the door. "I didn't take anything from you, Daniel. You gave it away the moment you let Laura tell me I wasn't good enough to spend the holidays with you." His face went red, and Laura grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. "Let's go," she hissed. "She's not going to budge." Daniel shook her off, glaring at me like he had suddenly realized something, like he had finally understood that he had lost. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with fury. "We'll see you in court." I smiled, slow and sharp. "I'll see you there," and with that I shut the door in his face. I stared at the phone in my hands, the words Thomas had just spoken still twisting through my mind like a blade. Daniel had bribed my lawyer. I had expected dirty tactics, expected his entitlement to push him further than ever before. But this was war. I set the phone down carefully, exhaling slowly. The hurt was still there, it would always be there, but now something stronger was taking its place. Rage, focus, power. The next morning, I was in Richard's office before sunrise, the documents spread before us. Richard leaned forward, scanning everything with an expression that teetered between admiration and fury. "They've backed themselves into a corner, Sophie," he murmured. "Tampering with legal documents, bribing a lawyer. This isn't just a family dispute anymore, it's fraud." I sat still, feeling the weight of his words. Fraud. Not just Daniel's greed, but an actual crime. He had crossed a line, and there was no coming back. That afternoon, I was in my home when the knock came. Not a polite request, not an apologetic conversation, a knock full of rage, of desperation. I knew who it was. I opened the door, and there stood Daniel, his expression dark, his body tense. Laura hovered behind him, her perfect facade finally cracking. "You had no right," Daniel spat. I tilted my head slightly, keeping my voice calm, controlled. "No right to what? Defend myself? Protect what's mine?" He stepped closer, the fury in his eyes almost shocking. This wasn't the son I had raised. This was a stranger with my child's face. "You're tearing this family apart," Laura finally spoke, her voice sharp as glass. "We won't let you do this, Sophie. You're being unreasonable. The house was always meant to be ours." She said it like it was fact, like the ink on my will was meaningless, like she could still bend me to her will. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I stepped aside slightly, letting them both see the stack of legal papers waiting on my desk. "I spoke with Thomas." Daniel froze. Laura's face went pale, but she covered it quickly with a sneer. "Whatever lies he's telling, we'll fight them." I let the moment stretch, let the weight of the truth settle on their shoulders like lead. Then I delivered the killing blow. "Daniel, He met my gaze, still trying to maintain control, still believing he could win. "Did you bribe Thomas to change my will?" The words hung in the air, a dagger suspended between us. Daniel blinked, just once, just enough for me to know he had done it. And now he was caught. Laura gripped his arm. "Don't answer her, she's trying to trick you." I laughed, low and sharp, letting them see the pure confidence radiating from me now. "I don't need tricks. I have proof." Daniel swallowed, finally sensing the walls closing in. I walked to my desk, picked up the signed affidavit from Thomas, and held it up. "This is the end of the line for you, Daniel. You tried to erase me. And now, you're about to lose everything." His breath hitched, his jaw tightening, but there was nothing left to say. Judge Howard adjusted his glasses, his sharp gaze locking onto me for a long moment before shifting to Daniel and Laura. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on us like a storm about to break. "This court has reviewed all evidence, testimonies, and legal documentation submitted in the matter of the Caldwell estate," he began, his voice crisp, unwavering. "The claims presented have demonstrated a clear and deliberate attempt to alter the estate documents through fraudulent means, compromising the intent of the legal owner." I could feel Daniel stiffen beside Laura, his jaw tightening, his hands clenched into fists against the table. Laura stared ahead, her mask of confidence cracking just enough to reveal the panic bubbling beneath the surface. The judge's tone grew heavier. "After careful review, I find that the estate's rightful ownership must remain with Miss Sophie Caldwell, as originally stated in the uncontested will. Furthermore, given the unethical attempts to alter this legal agreement, I am filing a recommendation for a financial penalty against the claimants, Daniel Caldwell and Laura Caldwell, for knowingly engaging in fraudulent behaviour in court." "Proceedings!" The courtroom exploded into murmurs. I felt a rush of air leave my lungs, the weight that had been suffocating me for weeks finally cracking apart. I had won, but that wasn't the real victory. The victory was in watching their faces, seeing the slow dawning horror as they realised they had lost everything. Daniel turned towards me, his face red with fury, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is a joke, Mom." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze without blinking. "No, Daniel. The joke was thinking you could steal from me and get away with it." Laura, always the strategist, gripped his arm, trying to control the situation before it spiralled out of their hands. "We'll appeal. This isn't over." Richard let out a low chuckle, his voice cool but lethal. "You'd be making an even bigger mistake." Daniel shook his head, his chest rising and falling too fast. Anger, shock, helplessness. He had lost, and now there was nothing left to take. The courtroom had ruled in my favour. The house was mine, and Daniel had lost. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like something had cracked inside me. Something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Laura had stormed out without looking back, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the floor, the sound a final act of defiance. She thought she deserved everything. She walked away with nothing. Daniel, though, had lingered, his expression tight, his posture stiff, not rage, not defeat, something worse, regret. I should have walked past him, should have let him stew in the consequences of his actions, but I couldn't ignore him. He was still my son. "Mum?" he had murmured, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I had looked at him then, really looked at him, the boy I had raised, now barely recognisable in the man who had tried to erase me. But it did. My voice had been quiet, steady. "And you made that choice." His throat had bobbed, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Laura, she said it was just a legal battle. I thought—" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You thought wrong." That had been the last thing I had said before walking out of the courthouse. Now, weeks later, he was calling me, trying to fix what he had broken. The phone trembled slightly in my grip, but I didn't hesitate as I pressed it to my ear. "I want to talk," Daniel said, his voice raw, hesitant. I let silence stretch between us before answering, calm but unyielding. "I'm listening." His breath hitched. I'm sorry, Mum, for everything, for how I treated you. I don't know how we got here, but I want to try to fix things." My pulse thundered. For months, I had waited for this moment, dreamed about hearing these words, imagined what they would feel like. But standing at the brink of forgiveness, I wasn't sure I could cross it. He had tried to erase me. How do you rebuild after that? I don't know what to say, Daniel. My voice was steady, but it held the edge of years of betrayal. He exhaled shakily. We don't have to go back to the way things were, just one conversation. That's all I'm asking for. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight of his words settle. Maybe it wasn't about winning or losing anymore. Maybe it was about seeing if there was anything left worth salvaging. One conversation, I repeated. We'll see where it leads. The dinner with Daniel had ended, the plates cleared, the wine glasses emptied, but the weight in my heart remained. Not heavy, not suffocating, just there. A quiet presence, a reminder that things weren't fixed, but they were changing. Daniel walked me to my car, his steps slow, hesitant. "Mum," he said, stopping just before I opened the door. "I know I still have a long way to go, but I'm really trying." I studied him in the dim glow of the streetlight. The man who had once been my little boy, the man I had fought against, mourned, and now, maybe, could begin to forgive. I know. My voice was steady but soft. "And I see it!" For the first time in months, maybe even years, his eyes filled with something pure, hope, relief, a second chance. Weeks passed, and the silence between us no longer felt like a wound. It was filling itself with conversations, shared laughter, and the tentative stitching of something that had once been shattered. But I knew I couldn't ignore the real test. Laura. She had remained silent, lurking behind the scenes, waiting for the moment when she would try to pull Daniel back into the life they had envisioned. One where I was nothing more than a memory tucked away in paperwork, erased from their future plans. But Daniel had changed, and when Laura finally made her move, he was ready. It happened on a quiet evening when I wasn't expecting it. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. "Mom, can I stop by? There's something I need to talk to you about," I replied with a simple, "Of course." An hour later, he was sitting across from me in my living room, a nervous energy thrumming through his posture. "Laura found out we've been talking," he admitted, his voice heavy. "She wasn't happy." I raised an eyebrow. "And what did she say?" His jaw tightened. "She told me I needed to choose, that if I wanted to rebuild my relationship with you, it meant letting go of her." The words hit harder than I expected. I'd always known Laura was manipulative, always understood the power she wielded over him, but hearing it said out loud, it confirmed everything. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice controlled. "And what did you tell her?" Daniel swallowed, looking down at his hands as if searching for the right words. Then, quietly but firmly, he said, "I told her that I wasn't choosing between her and you. I told her that if she loved me, truly loved me, she wouldn't make me erase my own mother just to keep her happy." The breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't just a conversation. This was a moment of reckoning. Daniel let out a slow sigh, rubbing his hands over his face, exhaustion lining his features. "She's furious. She's saying I betrayed her, that I let you manipulate me. But I'm done letting someone else control my choices." I felt something in my chest shift. For so long, I had believed I had lost him forever, believed that Laura had won, that her influence had buried the son I had raised. But here he was, choosing himself, choosing us, choosing what was right. I reached forward, placing a hand over his. "Daniel, I never wanted to take you away from her. I just wanted you to see me, to remember that I am still your mother, that I was always here, waiting for you to decide who you truly wanted to be." His shoulders shook slightly, and when he finally lifted his gaze to mine, I saw it. Not just regret, not just sorrow, but clarity. "I see you now, Mum." And just like that, everything changed. The weeks after my final conversation with Daniel felt like the first chapter of a new life, one I hadn't even realized I had been waiting to start. The court battle was behind me, the house was mine, and for the first time in years, I wasn't just a mother rebuilding her relationship. I was a woman reclaiming herself. And as fate would have it, the world had more waiting for me than I ever imagined. It started at a charity gala, one I'd been convinced to attend by Margaret, who refused to let me wither away inside my house. "You need to get out, Sophie," she had insisted. "Enjoy yourself. And who knows, maybe fate has something planned for you." I had laughed then, but now, standing in the grand ballroom draped in twinkling lights, glass in hand, I felt something shift in the air. A feeling, a whisper of possibility. And then I met him, James Ashford, a film director, successful, influential, completely out of my world, and yet somehow standing beside me at the bar like an old friend. "I saw you in that courtroom footage," he had said, offering me a wry smile. "You have presence, Sophie." I had laughed, shaking my head. Presence? That was just me fighting for my life. But he didn't seem convinced. "No, it was more than that," he said, eyes flickering with something almost curious. "Have you ever thought about acting?" And just like that, everything tilted. Acting? Me? The woman who had spent her life raising a son who nearly erased her? I had scoffed, ready to dismiss it, but something in his gaze made me hesitate. "I have a project coming up. I'd love for you to audition." I had stared at him, 1,000 doubts rising at once, but then Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. "Maybe fate has something planned for you." So I said yes. The audition was surreal. I wasn't an actress. At least I hadn't thought I was. But as I stood under the lights, reading lines that felt dangerously close to my own truth, about betrayal, about rising from ruin, I realized something undeniable. I wasn't acting at all. I was living it. And James saw it too. When I got the call weeks later telling me I had landed the leading role, my heart stopped. Me, Sophie Caldwell, a woman who had been discarded, underestimated, told she didn't fit in. Now, I was the face of a film. I was the woman no one would dare erase again. Daniel called after the news broke. "Mom," his voice wavered, You're starring in a movie." I smiled, letting the silence stretch just long enough. Funny how life works, isn't it? And for the first time in months, I heard him laugh. Genuine, soft, like a piece of the past slipping back in. Maybe forgiveness wasn't immediate. Maybe it didn't come with clean resolutions. But one thing was certain. My life was no longer something for others to claim. It was mine. And for the first time in years, the rehearsal hall was suffocating, the heat from the overhead lights making my skin slick with sweat. The weight of expectation pressed down on me like a vice. The director, James Ashford, stood in the shadows, observing with sharp, calculating eyes. I had never felt more out of place, more exposed. The moment the scene began, I knew something was wrong. I hesitated, searching for the right tone, the right emotion, and in that 1 second of doubt, the first assistant director slammed his clipboard onto the table. "Cut!" His voice was a gunshot. I flinched. The entire crew sighed loudly, shaking their heads, exchanging irritated glances. "Again," one of the producers muttered. "We don't have time for this." I swallowed hard, throat burning. The set felt like a battlefield. I tried again. This time my voice wavered, unsure, like a bird with a broken wing trying to take flight. Another shout. "This isn't a monologue, Sophie. Stop thinking and just act. You're stiff as hell." I froze. My hands trembled at my sides. The humiliation curled through me like smoke, wrapping itself around my lungs, choking me from the inside. Someone let out a bitter chuckle behind the cameras. And then, the worst part. Maybe she's just too old for this. The words cut deeper than anything else. I felt the familiar burn of shame rising in my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here, was I? This world wasn't meant for me. A woman my age? A woman who had spent decades being forgotten? And then James moved. He stepped into the middle of the chaos, his presence commanding, an immediate force of gravity. "Enough!" The single word snapped through the air like a whip. The room fell into stunned silence. James turned, his eyes locking onto mine. Deep, unwavering. Not angry, not disappointed. Just seeing me. "Sophie," he said, voice quieter now. "Come here." I blinked, unsure, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. But I moved. I followed him into the shadows of the set, away from the suffocating spotlight, away from the judgment. When I stopped, he reached out, gentle, cautious, placing his hands on my shoulders, grounding me. "Breathe." That was all he said. And suddenly, everything collapsed. The tears came fast and uncontrollable, an avalanche after weeks, months of holding them in. I shook, my chest tight with every emotion I had buried, and without thinking, I pressed my forehead against his shoulder, hiding myself. James didn't pull away. He didn't tell me to stop. He just let me be human. "You belong here." His voice was steady, quiet, unwavering in its truth. The words hit harder than anything else that had happened in that room. I believed him. I felt the fight return to my body, the fire rekindle in my veins. I wasn't going to let them push me out. Not again. Not ever. When I got home that night, my hands were still shaking. The humiliation of the rehearsal, the pressure of the production, the way the entire crew had laughed at me like I was some kind of joke. It all sat heavy in my chest, refusing to leave. But James's words stayed with me too. "You belong here." I wasn't ready to quit, not after everything I'd fought for. So I did the one thing no one expected. I signed up for an intensive acting course. The irony, the instructors were 3 people from the production team, the same ones who had mocked me during rehearsal, who had rolled their eyes when I stumbled over lines. The first day of class, I walked in feeling their smug grins before I even saw them. "Oh, look who decided to become a real actress," one of them muttered under his breath, chuckling. Another smirked. "James must really have a soft spot for you." Their laughter felt like a blade against my pride, but I didn't let it show. I sat down, lifted my chin and said, "I'll be the best student you've ever had." And just like that, they shut up. The first few weeks were hell. Every mistake, every hesitation, they noticed it all. They didn't hold back their sarcastic remarks, their exaggerated sighs, their condescending corrections. "No, Sophie, use your diaphragm. You sound like a lost grandmother. Try again. And this time, pretend you actually understand human emotions." It was brutal. But I took every insult, every criticism, and I learned from it. And then, something changed. One evening, I performed a monologue for the class. Something shifted in the room. The usual laughter didn't come. The muttered remarks never left their lips. Instead, they watched me, really watched. And when I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then one of the instructors, the loudest of my critics, slowly nodded and said, "That was actually pretty damn good." I felt my chest tighten. Had I finally proved myself? Had I won them over? The next day on set, something strange happened. The same people who had once rolled their eyes at me, now they nodded when I spoke, gave me real feedback without sarcasm, even complimented me after takes. And the whispers around the production had changed. I wasn't James's charity case anymore. I was a contender. Then the real shock came. My family found out. My sister called first. Wait, so you're actually good?" I scoffed. "Of course I am." She laughed, but there was a new tone in her voice, something between pride and disbelief. The biggest reaction? Daniel. When he saw the first clips from the film, he called me immediately. "Mom." His voice was different, not the voice of someone who had once tried to erase me, but the voice of someone seeing me for the first time. "You're amazing." I nearly dropped the phone. As I stepped into the dressing room before rehearsal, something felt off. It wasn't just the subtle shift in air or the way my pulse picked up for no reason. It was a warning, an instinct humming just beneath my skin. Everything looked normal at first. My makeup bag sat neatly on the vanity. The bottles of toner and foundation lined up like usual. But the silence in the room felt heavy. I reached for the toner, uncapped it, and poured a small amount into my palm. The moment the liquid touched my skin, I froze. Wrong. The texture wasn't light and refreshing like it should have been. It was thicker, slicker, greasy. I lifted my hand, watching the way the substance clung to my fingers like oil. A chill raced up my spine. Someone had switched it. Someone wanted me to ruin my face before filming. My stomach twisted as I turned back toward the vanity, eyes scanning every inch of the room. And then I saw them. Tiny glints of silver, half hidden in the folds of the cushion on my dressing chair. I stepped closer, heart hammering. Needles, placed there, waiting for me to sit. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was a warning dot, And then, tucked under the edge of my makeup bag, I saw the note. A simple white piece of paper, folded once. I picked it up slowly, my breath tight in my chest. I unfolded it, scanning the words scribbled in sharp, aggressive letters. Leave. This role was never yours. The dressing room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing inward. I wasn't being mocked anymore. I was being hunted. Someone on set wanted me gone. Someone had planned this, had gone out of their way to make sure I got the message loud and clear. And the worst part? They thought I'd be scared enough to leave. My hands tightened around the note. Fear curled at the edges of my mind, but underneath it, something stronger ignited. Rage, resolve, fire. They wanted me out. They wanted me to break? Absolutely not. I wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. The search for the saboteur began immediately. James wasn't the type to let things slide. The moment I showed him the note, his entire demeanour shifted. The calm, composed director was gone, replaced by a man ready for war. "This is unacceptable," he muttered under his breath, jaw clenching. He turned toward the production manager, his voice sharp, commanding. "Find out who did this. Now." The entire crew froze, sensing the tension rippling through the air. No one had expected me to fight back, but I wasn't some weak actress to be pushed aside. Not anymore. The investigation started small, checking the security footage near my dressing room, questioning anyone who had been around at the time. At first, it seemed hopeless. Whoever had done this had been careful. No obvious signs, no direct witnesses. But then, a mistake. One of the assistants noticed something strange. The day before my dressing room was sabotaged, a background actress, Krista, had been lingering near the makeup section, looking through products she had no reason to touch. She was low-level, part of the mass scenes, never someone with real influence. Until now. "Why was she there?" James asked, arms crossed, frustration brewing beneath the surface. The assistant hesitated. She said she needed a different shade of foundation, but Sophie's things were out at the time. That was it. James ordered security to check every dressing room camera from that day. And then, clear as day, there she was, Krista, reaching into my vanity, swapping bottles, checking over her shoulder. Caught. The moment security called her in, she tried to play innocent. "I don't know what you're talking about," she scoffed, folding her arms. But James wasn't having it. "The footage says otherwise." Her face drained of colour. Krista was gone by the end of the day. James hadn't wasted time. As soon as the footage confirmed her involvement, she was escorted off set, protesting, pleading, but there was no coming back from this. She had tried to sabotage me, to push me out, and instead, she was the one erased. That night, as I stood in the rehearsal hall, something felt different dot the tension that had wrapped itself around me since the moment I stepped onto set. It was gone. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to prove myself. I knew I belonged. And when we ran through the final rehearsal, something shifted. The way the crew looked at me, the way the dialogue flowed, the way every movement felt effortless. James watched from the shadows, arms crossed, nodding slightly as the final scene played out. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. And when the last word was spoken, the last movement finished, the last beat hit just right, he finally spoke. That's it. The production team exhaled as if they had been holding their breath. There was no hesitation now. Dot. No doubt. Dot. This film was ready. Dot. Tomorrow, comma, the world would see me. As I walked toward my dressing room, my phone buzzed. "Margaret." "You ready for this?" she asked, voice buzzing with excitement. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "Does anyone ever feel ready?" She chuckled. "Well, you should, because tomorrow, Sophie, you're not just an actress, you're a star." Her words settled into my chest like warmth spreading through my veins. For the first time, I let myself believe it. I had won. Dot. And tomorrow, I would shine. Dot. The morning of the premiere was a dream wrapped in chaos. Stylists fluttered around me, adjusting the folds of my gown, fixing curls that refused to stay in place. The hum of voices surrounded me, the tension thrumming through the air. I barely had a second to breathe before my phone buzzed again. "Daniel." I stared at his name glowing on the screen for a long second before picking up. Mom. His voice was different, steady, quiet, filled with something undeniable. You're starring in a movie. I let out a breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. Funny how life works, isn't it? He chuckled softly, the first real laugh I had heard from him in years. I was wrong, he finally said, about everything. The words hit deeper than expected, settling between us in the silence. And I'm proud of you, Mum. The walls around my heart shifted, just slightly, just enough to make space for the moment. Thank you, Daniel. When I stepped onto the red carpet that evening, the flash of cameras was blinding, the roar of voices overwhelming. Reporters called my name, fans reached out, people stared at me like I was something otherworldly. A woman they had never expected, never considered, never thought could rise like this. But here I was, smiling, standing tall, shining. And when James walked beside me, voice low, a smirk tugging at his lips, he said one thing that made everything settle into perfect clarity. I told you. You belong here. And for the first time in my life, I believed it completely. The premiere was just the beginning. I had stepped onto that red carpet as an actress nobody believed in, as a woman who had been cast aside, fighting tooth and nail to reclaim her place in the world. But after the film's release, after audiences saw me, felt me, believed me, everything changed. The reviews were ruthless, not toward me, but toward everyone who had doubted me. Sophie Caldwell is the revelation no one saw coming. A powerhouse performance that commands attention. She doesn't just act, she lives through every moment on screen. Suddenly, the whispers of "she's too old for this" and "this was just a fluke" vanished. And in their place, a frenzy. The industry wanted more. The offers poured in like a storm. Directors, producers, agents, everyone had a project waiting, eager to attach my name to it. It was overwhelming, but it was also vindication. For every rejection, every humiliation, every moment spent wondering if I was wasting my time, this was the answer. I wasn't. I was unstoppable. And as my career exploded, something happened behind the scenes. The people who had tried to erase me, who had laughed at me, sabotaged me, pushed me down, began to fall apart. Krista, nobody would hire her after the scandal. Her name became synonymous with betrayal, and she was blacklisted from major productions. Thomas, my former lawyer, his reputation was in ruins after his role in trying to manipulate my inheritance. Even Daniel and Laura, they weren't untouched by the wave of consequences. Laura's connections dried up as word spread about her involvement in the inheritance battle. Daniel? Well, he finally understood what he had lost. But none of that mattered now, because while they crumbled, I rose higher. Film after film, success after success, my name was etched into the industry untouchable. People didn't just respect me now, they feared ever underestimating me again. And for the first time, standing on set for my next major project, looking around at the crew, feeling the weight of what I had built, I realized something. I had won. Not just the battle, not just the war. I had won my life back.